Hey, my name's Jack Miller. I'm 27 years old and I live out here in Harney County, Oregon on a small ranch. That's been in my family for generations. It's not much, just a few hundred acres of rolling hills, a barn that's seen better days, a herd of about 50 sheep and a handful of cattle I let graze on the open pastures. I've got an old tractor that rattles like it's about to give up the ghost, a milking machine for the cows, and a loyal border collie named Rex, who helps me round up the animals when they wander too far. The place isn't fancy, but it's mine. My dad passed away 3 years ago in a freak accident with the hay baler, leaving me to handle everything alone. No siblings, no extended family to speak of. I dropped out of community college after that to keep the ranch afloat. I've learned a bit about land laws the hard way. Nearly lost a chunk of the property to a boundary dispute with a neighbor last year, so I know my way around basic deeds and contracts. Now, life out here is quiet, predictable. I wake up before dawn, check the fences, feed the animals, and spend the afternoons fixing whatever's broken. Evenings are for paperwork or just sitting on the porch with a beer watching the sun dip behind the Steens Mountains. I don't have a wife or kids, never really made time for that. The town's small Burns is the nearest spot with a grocery store, in a bar, and folks know me as the guy who keeps to himself. I sell wool and milk at the local farmer's market, and that's about as social as I get. It's a simple existence, but after losing Dad, it's all I need, no complications. No surprises. That changed one scorching afternoon in July. The temperature was pushing 40 degrees. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer over the dry grass and turns your shirt into a second skin within minutes. I was out by the broad Exide, eastern fence line, mending a section where the sheep had pushed, through again wire cutters and hand sweat dripping into my eyes. I was focused on twisting the barbed wire back into place when I heard the bell at the front gate. It wasn't the usual insistent ring from delivery guys or neighbors. This one was tentative, almost hesitant, like whoever was out there had been standing for a while debating whether to ring again or just turn around and leave. I wiped my forehead with the back of my arm set down, the tools, and hopped on the ATV to head over the gates about a quarter-mile from the main house, and by the time I got there, the dust from the gravel drive was kicking up in the hot wind. I swung open the wooden gate, expecting maybe a lost hiker or someone from the county office. Instead, there was a young woman standing there, looking like she'd walked a long way under the sun. She was about my age, maybe 26, with dusty, blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail, wearing a faded, blue t-shirt and worn jeans that had seen better days. Her face was flushed from the heat and her eyes, hazel tired, held a kind of exhaustion that went deeper than just the weather. She had a small backpack slung over one shoulder, and in her hand, she clutched a crumpled envelope. Before I could even say hello or ask if she needed water, she looked me straight in the eye and said something that stopped me cold. My father said, "I'm the payment for his debt." I blinked, not sure. I'd heard right. "Excuse me." I managed, stepping closer, but keeping the gate between us for a second. She swallowed, her voice steady, but edged with something like resignation. "Cha. My dad owed your father money, $50,000. It was for my mom's cancer treatments years ago. She didn't make it, and now, the debt's in my name. He transferred it to me legally. I'm here to settle it." She held out the envelope, her hand trembling just a little. "This is the agreement. It's all in there." I took the envelope, feeling the paper warm from her grip. Inside was a handwritten note on yellowed stationery, along with what looked like an old notarized document. The note was from her dad, addressed to my late father. Something about borrowing the money 5 years back, promising to pay it off, but times got hard. The notarized part had signatures, his, hers, and a witness, and it outlined that Emily Carter, that was her name printed at the top, was assuming the debt as collateral. It didn't spell out what payment meant exactly, but the implication hung in the air like the heat. I looked up at her, my mind racing. I'd never heard of this debt. Dad never mentioned it, and he was meticulous about records. But the signatures looked real enough, and the notary stamp was from an office in Burns. I don't know about this," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "My dad's been gone 3 years. If this is legit, why now?" She shifted her weight, glancing down at the dusty ground. "He said it was time. Said you'd understand. I don't have the money, but I can work. Whatever you need on the ranch in the house." I grew up helping on farms back home. Her voice cracked just a bit at the end. But she straightened up like she was steeling herself for rejection. The sun was beating down and she looked like she might pass out any second. I couldn't just send her away without figuring this out. Come inside, I said, finally opening the gate wider. We'll talk. She hesitated, then nodded, and followed me up the drive to the house. Rex came bounding over, sniffing at her curiously, but she knelt down and scratched his ears without fear, which told me something about her. Inside, the air was cooler, fans whirring in the old farmhouse kitchen. I poured her a glass of water from the fridge and set it on the table along with some leftover biscuits from breakfast. She drank gratefully, but her eyes kept flicking to the envelope in my hand. We sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table where Dad and I used to eat. Look, Emily. Right? I'm Jack. I don't know what your dad told you, but I'm not in the business of whatever this is. If there's a debt, we'll sort it out properly. But you're not payment. That's not how things work, she shook her head. The papers say otherwise. I signed them. It's my responsibility now. I scanned the documents again. They were dated 4 years ago, around the time her mom must have been sick. It mentioned medical bills, treatments in Portland, ungodly expensive. I knew that much. But something felt off. Dad was generous, sure, but he'd have mentioned a loan this big. Stay here tonight. I said I've got a spare room. My dad's old one. It's clean. Tomorrow we'll go through this if it's real. I'll drop a proper work contract, minimum wage, fair hours. No strings, you get rights like any employee. She looks surprised and relieved. Thank you. I didn't know what to expect. The pastures. She set her backpack down and I left her to settle. Back in the kitchen, I stared at the papers. If this was true, fine. I could use the help around here, but if it wasn't, I needed to dig deeper. That night, as the crickets chirped outside and the house settled into silence, I made a decision. If this story was real, then I would be the first one to read every last detail. No one was going to walk onto my land and hand over their life without me verifying why. That night, after showing Emily to the guest room, I couldn't sleep. The house felt heavier than usual, the creaks of the old wooden floors echoing my thoughts. Rex paced at the foot of my bed, sensing my restlessness. But I waved him off and headed to the small office in the back of the house. Dad's old space, cluttered with file cabinets and stacks of yellowed papers. I pulled out the key to the safe from its hiding spot under the desk drawer and cracked it open. Inside were the ranch deeds, tax records, and a bundle of old emails printed out. Dad wasn't much for computers, but he kept hard copies of anything important. I spread the documents from Emily across the desk, comparing them to Dad's records. The notarized agreement looked legitimate on the surface. Dates matched up to about 5 years ago, signatures in blue ink, even a faded stamp from the notary, and Burns. But something gnawed at me. Dad had loaned money before, to neighbors hit by drought or medical bills, but he always documented it meticulously. If he'd given $50,000 to Emily's father for her mom's cancer treatments, there should be a trace. I started with the bank statements from that period, flipping through pages of withdrawals and deposits. Nothing jumped out at first, but then I found a line item. A wire transfer out for exactly $50,000 dated 6 years back labeled Carter Loan Medical. My heart sank a little, so it was real. But as I dug deeper, pulling out correspondence folders, I hit pay dirt. There was an email chain from 4 years ago. Dad to Emily's father, confirming the loan forgiveness. Jim, it read, I know times are tough after losing Sarah. Consider the debt cleared. No need to pay back a dime. Take care of your girl. Attached was a scanned bank document showing the loan marked as paid in full, waived, no outstanding balance, no transfer to Emily's name. The debt had been erased long before she showed up at my gate. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. Why hadn't her dad told her? And what about all the money she might have scraped together over the years, thinking it was going toward repayment? If I was right, he'd been pocketing it or using it for something else. The thought made my blood boil. Not at Emily, but at the kind of man who'd let his daughter believe she was worthless enough to be traded like livestock. I decided not to tell her yet. I needed more proof, something ironclad. The next morning, I'd head into town to check the records office. For now, she'd stay. But under real terms, not this twisted payment nonsense. The sun was barely up when I heard movement in the kitchen. Emily was already there, washing the few dishes from last night. her movements careful and precise, like she was afraid of breaking something. Rex sat at her feet, tail wagging. He'd taken to her quick. "Morning," I said, pouring coffee for both of us. She jumped a little, then nodded. "I didn't mean to overstep," she said, drying her hands on a towel. "You're not overstepping," I replied, handing her a mug. "But let's make this official. If you're staying to work, we'll do it right." I grabbed a notepad and sketched out a simple employment contract. Minimum wage as per Oregon law, 8-hour days with breaks, tasks like helping with the sheep shearing, milking the cows, driving the tractor for hay baling. No overtime without pay, no personal obligations. I'd cover room and board as part of it. She read it over, her brow furrowing. "This is fair," she said quietly. "But the debt? We'll figure that out separately," I cut in. "Sign if you want the job. If not, I'll drive you back to town." She hesitated, then signed. "Thank you, Jack. I won't let you down." Over the next few days, she threw herself into the work. I showed her the ropes, how to use the electric shears for the sheep without nicking them, the rhythm of the milking machine on the cows, even how to start the old John Deere tractor without it stalling. She picked it up fast, smarter than she let on. One afternoon, we were out in the pasture, herding the cattle back from the far field with Rex's help. She laughed for the first time when the dog nipped at a stubborn heifer's heels, sending it trotting. It was a small sound, but it cut through the quiet like sunlight. We ate simple dinners together. Grilled steaks from one of the cows we'd butchered last season, potatoes from the garden, fresh milk. She'd asked permission before sitting down, before taking seconds, before anything. It drove me nuts, not because it annoyed me, but because it showed how deep the damage went. She thought she had no worth beyond what she could pay back. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars come out, she opened up a bit. "Mom got sick when I was 20, she said, staring at the horizon. "Lung cancer. Dad borrowed the money for chemo in Portland. It didn't work. After she died, he changed. I worked 2 jobs, waitressing in Burns, cleaning houses to help pay it back. But he said it wasn't enough. That's why this," I nodded, keeping my face neutral, but inside pieces were falling into place. If the debt was cleared 4 years ago, right after her mom's death, then every dollar she'd earned since had gone. Where? Not to me, that's for sure. I felt a protective urge stir, something I hadn't felt since Dad's accident. But I held back on the truth. I needed to confirm it all first. The next day, I drove into Burns under the pretense of picking up supplies. At the Harney County Recorder's office, I requested public records on any liens or loans tied to the ranch or the Carters. The clerk, an old friend of Dad's, pulled up the files. No active debt. The original loan showed as forgiven, stamped, and filed. I photocopied everything, my hands steady but my mind racing. Back home, Emily was in the barn practicing with the milking machine. She looked up when I walked in, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Everything okay?" I set the papers down on a hay bale. It was time. "Emily, sit down. We need to talk about that debt." Her face paled, but she nodded. I laid out the evidence. The email, the bank waiver, the county records. "It's been cleared for years. Your dad knew. You don't owe me, or anyone, a damn thing from that loan." She stared at the documents, her hands shaking as she flipped through them. Tears welled up, but not from relief. At least not yet. He lied to me? All this time? Her voice broke. "The money I gave him, it wasn't for this?" I shook my head. "No. And if someone told you otherwise, they were lying." She crumpled a little, burying her face in her hands. I wanted to reach out, but I gave her space. This was just the beginning of unraveling whatever mess her dad had spun. But as she sat there, something shifted in me. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was in this now, whether I liked it or not. The revelation hit Emily like a freight train. She sat there in the barn, the papers slipping from her fingers onto the hay-strewn floor, her face a mask of disbelief turning to raw hurt. "He lied," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "All those years? working doubles, skipping meals, sending every penny home, and it was already gone? Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't sob, just a quiet, shattering silence. I knelt beside her, not touching, just being there. Rex whined and nudged her hand, but she barely noticed. We talked late into the night after that. I made us sandwiches, simple ham and cheese on rye, and we sat at the kitchen table under the dim overhead light. She spilled more than she probably meant to. Growing up in a trailer park on the edge of Burns, her mom's long battle with cancer that drained everything, her dad's descent into drinking and cards after the funeral, he always said it was for her. Emily murmured, staring into her coffee. That the debt was our family's curse? I believed him. I had to. I shared a bit about my own loss, Dad's accident, how it left me questioning every decision. But mostly, I listened. By dawn, she was exhausted but resolute. I need to know everything, she said. Help me find out what else he's hiding. The next few days blurred into a makeshift investigation. I cleared my schedule as much as I could. The sheep could wait on shearing for a bit, and we dove in together. Emily pulled up what she could from her old emails and bank apps on my laptop while I made calls. First to the bank in Burns. They confirmed the original loan waiver. No balances outstanding. Then to the county assessor's office for any records on her family. That's when the real horror started unfolding. Emily mentioned a piece of land her grandparents had left her mom. A 100-acre plot in the high desert, not far from here, inherited after her mom's death. Dad always said it was worthless scrub, she explained, as we pored over maps. But when I cross-referenced it with public records, red flags popped up. The land sat over a known natural gas deposit. Nothing huge, but enough that energy scouts had been sniffing around the region for years. Current valuations? Easily $300,000. Maybe more with drilling rights? And there, buried in the filings, was a recent lien, $60,000. Borrowed under Emily's name from a company called Salazar Recovery Services in Burns. Signed 6 months ago. No cosigner listed, but the notary was the same shady one from her original papers. Salazar, I muttered, searching online from the ranch's spotty Wi-Fi. The company's website looked legit debt collection. Asset recovery. But digging into local forums and reviews painted a darker picture. Complaints about strong-arm tactics, hidden fees, even whispers of loan sharking. Victor Salazar, the owner, was a name that came up often. A burly ex-con from Portland who'd moved out here a decade ago, buying up bad debts and squeezing folks dry. This isn't a bank loan, I said, showing Emily the screen. It's a trap. Your dad must have forged your signature to get the cash, probably for gambling debts, and used you as bait to buy time. She went pale. Time for what? To sell your land? I replied grimly. If you're missing or tied up here paying some fake debt, he could push the sale through without you contesting. The gas rights alone. Emily stood up abruptly, pacing the room. He sent me here to disappear. My own father. The betrayal cut deep. She still cared for him. Memories of better times before the bottle and the cards. But this was unforgivable. I felt a surge of anger too, protective in a way I hadn't expected. I'd lost my dad to an accident, not betrayal, but seeing her unravel like this stirred something fierce. We'll stop him, I promised. First, we freeze that land. I know a lawyer in town, old friend of my dad's. He'll help. We spent the next day prepping, photocopying everything, drafting affidavits. Emily called her dad from the house phone, her voice steady but edged. Why didn't you tell me the original debt was cleared? She asked. He hemmed and hawed, claiming forgetfulness. But when she pressed about the new loan, he hung up. That sealed it. We were driving into Burns to file a fraud report when trouble showed up at the gate. It was late afternoon, the heat finally easing into a golden haze when Rex started barking like mad. I looked out the window and saw a black SUV pulling up the drive, uninvited. 3 men got out, 2 burly types in cheap suits. And in the middle, a stocky guy in his 50s with a shaved head and a gold chain peeking from his collar. Victor Salazar. I told Emily to stay inside and stepped out onto the porch, Rex at my heels growling low. Jack Miller, Salazar called, sauntering up with a smirk. Heard you got something that belongs to me. I crossed my arms, blocking the door. This is private property. What do you want? He chuckled. pulling a folded paper from his pocket. The girl? Emily Carter. She's collateral on a loan I hold. Her old man transferred the rights. Time to collect. Emily must have heard because she came out despite my warning, standing behind me. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice trembling but firm. Salazar's eyes narrowed, his goons shifting uneasily. I stepped forward, putting myself between them. Those papers are fraud. We've got proof. And if you think you can just walk in here and take someone? He laughed again, but there was no humor in it. Boy, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Step aside or things get messy. Rex snarled, and I felt my fists clench. Emily touched my arm, whispering, Jack, don't! For my dad? But I shook my head. No way was I letting this happen. Get off my land, I said, loud enough for the neighbors' distant fields to hear. I've already called my lawyer and the sheriff. They'll be here any minute. It was a bluff. I hadn't called yet, but it worked. This ain't over, Miller. Debts get paid one way or another. They piled back into the SUV and peeled out, dust clouding the air. Emily sagged against the porch rail, shaking. He'll come back. Not if we move fast, I said, pulling out my phone for real this time. I dialed the lawyer first, then the Harney County Sheriff's Office. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the pastures, I stood there with her, Rex between us. She'd come here thinking she was a pawn. Now she was fighting back, and I was right there with her. If Salazar wanted her, he'd have to go through the law. And me. The days after Salazar's visit were a whirlwind of preparation. I barely slept, and Emily was the same. Pacing the house, poring over documents, her face set in a determined mask that hid the storm inside. We knew he wouldn't back down easy. Men like him thrived on fear and loopholes, but we weren't running. That night, after the sheriff's deputy came by to take our statements, dusting the gate for prints just in case, I called Tom Harlan, the lawyer in Burns who'd helped me with the boundary dispute last year. He was an old-timer, mid-60s, with a no-nonsense drawl and an office cluttered with fishing trophies. Bring everything you've got, he said over the phone. Sounds like fraud, maybe worse. We'll hit him hard. The next morning, Emily and I loaded up the truck with our files. The forged loan docs, bank waivers, county land records, even screenshots of Salazar's shady online reviews. Rex rode shotgun, his head out the window, as we drove the 30 miles into town under a cloudless sky. Harlan's office was above the hardware store on Main Street, smelling of coffee and old books. He spread our papers across his desk, nodding as we explained. Classic con, he muttered, adjusting his glasses. Your dad waived the original debt clean. I've seen the stamps. This new one's got forgery written all over it. Signature doesn't match Emily's on the older ones. And that land? We'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze any sale. Harney County Court's small. We can get a hearing fast. We spent hours building the case. Affidavits from Emily swearing the signature on the $60,000 loan wasn't hers. My statement on Salazar's threats and subpoenas for bank reps and witnesses. Harlan pulled strings for a quick court date, 3 days out, in the old brick courthouse in Burns. Bring steel nerves, he warned. Her dad's gonna be there. And Salazar's type? They'll lawyer up slick. Emily was quiet on the drive home, staring out at the sagebrush flats. What if he denies everything? She asked finally. Then we bury him in proof, I said. You're not alone in this. Back at the ranch, we kept busy to stave off the nerves. Emily threw herself into chores, oiling the tractor, mending a water trough, while I handled calls. We subpoenaed a neighbor from her old trailer park who'd seen her dad at underground poker games in Hines, racking up debts. The bank in Burns agreed to send a rep to testify about the waived loan and suspicious transfers from Emily's accounts to her father's. Even the notary from the docks turned out to be a repeat offender. Harlan dug up prior complaints against him for backdating. Piece by piece, the net tightened. The night before the hearing, we sat on the porch as thunder rumbled in the distance. A rare summer storm brewing over the mountains. Emily leaned against the rail, Rex at her feet. I still love him, you know, she said softly. Even after all this, he's my dad. I nodded, handing her a beer. Doesn't mean he gets away with it. What he did, using you like that, it's not love, it's control. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes softening. You've been more of a, I don't know, a protector than he ever was? Why? You didn't have to get involved. I shrugged, staring at the darkening sky. Because it's right. And maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to rebuild alone. Lightning flashed and we headed inside as rain started to patter. That night, sleep came fitful. Dreams of courtrooms and shadows. The hearing was in the county courthouse's main chamber, a wood-paneled room with creaky benches and a judge's bench that looked like it dated back to the pioneer days. Judge Harlan, no relation to Tom, just a coincidence, was a stern woman in her 50s. Known for cutting through nonsense, the gallery was sparse, a few locals curious about the drama, the bank rep in a suit, the neighbor witness fidgeting in his seat. Emily sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, her hands clasped tight. I squeezed her shoulder once before it started. Salazar slouched in with his lawyer, a slick Portland type in an expensive suit, smirking like he owned the place. But the real gut punch was when Emily's dad shuffled in, handcuffed and flanked by deputies. Jim Carter looked smaller than I'd imagined, mid-50s. Gaunt, with bloodshot eyes and a rumpled shirt. He avoided Emily's gaze as he took the stand after opening statements. Tom laid it out methodically. The original debt waived, the forged signature on the new loan, the land's value, and the rushed sale attempt. The bank rep confirmed the waiver, showing emails and ledgers. The neighbor testified to seeing Jim at high-stakes games, boasting about flipping some desert scrub for big bucks. Salazar's lawyer objected left and right, claiming consensual debt transfer. But Judge Harlan shut him down. Save the spin. Counsel. Let's hear from the father. Jim took the oath, his voice shaky. Tom grilled him. Did you forge your daughter's signature on the $60,000 loan from Salazar Recovery? He denied it at first, mumbling about family agreements. But under cross, with the mismatched signatures projected on a screen, he cracked. I was scared, he admitted, glancing at Emily. After Sarah died, the debts piled up. The original loan from your dad. Yeah, he waived it, but I didn't tell her. Needed the money she sent. Then Salazar offered to buy the old debt cheap, but I needed more. The land. It's worth a fortune with the gas surveys. I figured if she was out of the way. Emily stood up then, tears streaming. Out of the way? Dad, you sold me. Like I was nothing. The courtroom went silent. Jim hung his head. I was gonna split the money. For us. I swear. Judge Harlan banged the gavel. Enough. The evidence is clear. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted illegal transfer of assets. She ruled the loans invalid, ordered the land unfrozen, and returned to Emily's sole ownership, and slapped a restraining order on Salazar. Jim was remanded for further charges, fraud, and conspiracy. As deputies led him away, he mouthed, "Sorry to Emily," but she turned away. Salazar bolted up, red-faced. This is bullshit. She's mined by contract. The judge fixed him with a glare. Mr. Salazar, your contract smack of human trafficking. I'm referring your firm to the state AG for investigation. Expect audits. His lawyer dragged him out, muttering threats. But the fight was over. The courtroom emptied, leaving just us, Tom, and the echo of the gavel. Emily collapsed into a bench, sobbing. I sat beside her, finally pulling her into a hug as she shook. It's done, I whispered. You're free. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, looking at me with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. I thought I came here to disappear, she said, her voice breaking. But you made me visible. For the first time in years, someone saw me, not as a debt, but as me. I held her gaze, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the case. In that moment, amid the dusty courtroom air, I realized this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about us, two people who'd stumbled into each other's lives and chosen to fight together. The storm had broken, but the real rebuilding was just beginning. The weeks following the hearing felt like the calm after a wildfire. Everything scorched, but finally still, with room for new growth. Emily walked out of that courthouse a free woman, the judge's ruling echoing in our ears. Loans voided, land title restored in her name alone, and a permanent injunction against any further claims. Salazar's operation crumbled under the state investigation. Last I heard, he was facing federal charges for racketeering. As for her dad, Jim was sentenced to 5 years in the state pen up in Pendleton. Fraud, forgery, and attempted trafficking. Emily didn't visit him, at least not right away. Maybe someday, she said one evening, staring at the horizon. When I'm ready to forgive? If I ever am. We drove back to the ranch in silence, Rex greeting us with frantic tail wags like he'd sensed the victory. Emily collapsed onto the porch swing, the weight of years lifting but leaving her hollow. I sat beside her, not pushing, just sharing the quiet. What now? She asked finally, her voice small. You're free, I said. Whatever you want. You don't owe me a thing. She looked at me, eyes searching. And if I want to stay? Not because I have to, but because I choose? I felt something shift in my chest, a warmth I'd been ignoring amid the chaos. Then, stay. As long as you want. She did. Not out of obligation, but step by step. Choice by choice. The first few days were raw. She cried in the barn over old photos of her mom, raged at the kitchen table about her dad's betrayal. I listened, offered coffee or a walk through the pastures when words failed. Rex became her shadow, curling up at her feet during the tough nights. We didn't rush into anything romantic. Hell, I wasn't even sure what us meant yet, but we worked side by side, her driving the tractor to bale hay, me teaching her how to negotiate wool prices at the market in Burns. She had a knack for it, spotting deals I missed, turning our small operation more efficient. Emily dove into reclaiming her land too. We drove out to the plot, a vast stretch of arid high desert, dotted with sagebrush and backed by the Pueblo Mountains. Surveys confirmed the gas deposits, but she wasn't in a hurry to sell. Mom left it for me, she said one afternoon as we hiked the boundaries. Not for quick cash. Maybe we could lease parts sustainably. Wind turbines or something green. I nodded. It was her call. With Harlan's help, she set up a trust to protect it, ensuring no one could touch it again. As summer faded into fall, the ranch transformed. Emily suggested expanding the herd, adding more sheep for organic wool. And we used some of her inheritance savings to buy equipment. The milking shed got an upgrade and we started selling cheese at the farmer's market, her recipes turning heads. Folks in town whispered at first, "That Carter girl tangled up in all that mess?" But Emily held her head high, and soon the talk shifted to admiration. "Tough as nails," the feed store owner said once, clapping me on the back. "You two make a good team." We did. It started subtle, shared glances over dinner, her hand brushing mine while fixing a fence. One crisp October evening after a long day shearing, we sat by a bonfire in the yard, Rex dozing nearby. The stars were out, the kind of clear night sky you only get in places like Harney County. "Jack," she said softly, "I came here thinking I was nothing but a debt. You showed me otherwise." I turned to her, the firelight dancing on her face. "You were always more than that." I just saw it. She leaned in then and we kissed. Slow, tentative at first, then real. No fireworks, no rush. Just two people who'd walked through hell and chosen each other on the other side. A year passed like that. Seasons blending on the ranch. Winter brought snowdrifts and cozy nights by the wood stove. Emily curled up with books on sustainable farming she'd ordered online. She enrolled in an agribusiness course through the community college in Ontario, driving the hour each way twice a week. "I want to build this place," she told me one morning, "over eggs from our chickens. With you." Spring saw the herd grow, lambs bouncing in the pastures, and Emily's land leased for a small solar farm. Clean energy, steady income without selling out. We hired a part-timer from town to help with the heavy lifting, freeing us for bigger plans, expanding the cheese production, maybe even a roadside stand for tourists heading to the Alvord Desert. By summer, life had settled into something beautiful. Emily was pregnant, our first, unexpected but welcomed with open arms. We found out on a rainy afternoon in the doctor's office in Burns, her hand squeezing mine as the ultrasound hummed. "A boy," the text said, and Emily smiled through tears. "We'll name him after your dad," she whispered later, back home. I didn't argue. It felt right. But we built a nursery in the spare room, painted it soft blue, and planted a garden out front with flowers her mom had loved. The ranch thrived, wool sales up, milk contracts with local dairies, even a small grant for eco-friendly practices. Neighbors stopped by more, sharing tools or stories, and Emily blossomed, confident, laughing easy, the shadows of her past fading like morning mist. One evening, a year to the day she arrived, we sat on the porch again, her belly rounding under her shirt, Rex at our feet. The sun dipped low, painting the hills gold. "You don't owe me anything." She took my hand, lacing her fingers with mine. "I choose this. Every day." And that's how it was. Not a debt repaid, but a life chosen. The ranch wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. A place where broken things mended, where choices built something stronger than obligations ever could. As the stars emerged, I pulled her close, feeling our son kick gently. For the first time since losing Dad, I wasn't just surviving. I was home.